Morning everybody. Today we are going to talk about one-step equations. So we're actually going to be solving things now. We're not actually just going to be leaving them in expressions. We'll actually get some answers. So to start off with one-step equations, we first need to talk about inverse operations. So what inverse operations are the opposite or the operations that undo each other. So inverse is the same as opposite. Now, if we're talking about opposite, we need to figure out operations that undo each other or the opposite of our operations. So what we have first is addition. What is the operation that undoes addition or is the opposite? Well, that is subtraction. So that is the opposite of addition. So if subtraction is the opposite of addition, the opposite of subtraction must be addition. Okay, then if we have multiplication, the opposite of that is going to be division. And then if the opposite of multiplication is division, the opposite of division is multiplication. Now we'll be talking more about what the opposite of a fraction is tomorrow. So that'll be on tomorrow's video. So the question that we're going to ask ourselves now is, what does balanced look like? So if we think of weightlifting, and we're talking about balancing, if you were here lifting weights like this, you would lift maybe, let's say, 5 reps of bicep curls on your right side, but then you also want to do 5 reps of bicep curls on your left side, because you don't want one arm going to be stronger than the other. What you do on one side, you want to do to the other, so they're balanced. So you have a balanced set of muscles. So that's going to be the same thing in math. So we are going to start solving these equations. So the first step, it says to draw a line. When I say draw a line, I mean we're going to draw a line straight down from the equal sign. Now this is like our balance line. So what we do on one side, we have to do to the other. Just like if we're lifting weights, what we do on our right arm, we have to do to our left side. So it says step 2, add or subtract or multiply and divide on both sides. Okay, so what I have here is y plus 7 equals 10. What I need to ask myself is, we need to get this y by itself. So we're trying to get the variable or the letter all by itself. So I need to ask myself, what is on the same side as my y? Well, I have a plus 7 here. Now what I'm going to try to do is undo that plus 7. If I'm undoing something, I need to do the opposite of what it says. So if this says plus 7, I'm going to undo it by doing minus 7. If I get 7 minus 7, that gives me 0. These cancel out. Now, remember our balance line, what we do on one side, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to also subtract 7 from this side. Now I have 10 minus 7, which gives me 3. This y is now all by itself, so it comes down here. We have the equal sign in the middle. Some of you may have heard of railroad tracks. But now we have y equals 3. So our answer is y equals 3. Now I could check this if I wanted to. How I check that is I take my 3, my y equals 3. So if I have y equals 3, I can take this 3 and I can put it right back in for my y. So I can replace y with it. If I do 3 plus 7, 3 plus 7 equals 10. Exactly what it says up here. So 3 plus 7 does equal 10. I know that my answer is correct. Now over here, we have 6 equals 2g. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to draw a line right down the middle of our equal sign, because that is our balance line. Now I have 2g, so I'm trying to get g by itself. When 2 and the g are touching, that means multiply. So I'm going to do the opposite of multiply, which is divide. What I do on one side, I have to do to the other to stay balanced. So I get g equals 6 divided by 2 is 3. So g equals 3. If I go down to my next problem, I have 16 equals p minus 22. First step, draw our balance line. I am trying to get p all alone, so I need to do the opposite of 22, or minus 22, which is plus 22. Those will cross out. I get plus 22 over here. 6 plus 2 gives me 8. 1 plus 2 gives me 3. So I get 38. P equals 38. Now in this problem, it looks like a fraction. But what we have is we have a division problem here, because this line also means division. So what I have is x divided by 2 equals 8. So I got to think, what is the opposite of division? Well, if I'm doing the opposite of division, that's multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by 2 on both sides. Remember, what I do on one side, I have to do to the other, because we want to stay balanced. So we have x equals 2 times 8, which is 16. So that's our first introduction to one-step equations. Eventually, we'll be getting into equations that look like this. So even these whole long equations, they all come out to equal one answer. So eventually we'll get there, but not yet. Again, we have to solve these one-step equations. I'm going to first draw my balance line. I have negative 5 times y. Trying to get y by itself. So the opposite of times is divide. I'm going to divide by negative 5. So those cancel out. I get y equals negative 65 divided by 5, which is a positive 13. Now it's positive because two negatives equal a positive when I'm dividing. Here I have a division problem. We have n divided by 4. So I'm going to draw my balance line. Opposite of division is to multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides to stay balanced. I get n equals negative 2 times 4. One negative and one positive gives me a negative. 2 times 4 is 8. So negative 8. Okay, this one, we're going to draw our balance line. Now we have t minus 13. So t minus 13, the opposite is plus. We're going to add 13. Now because I have a negative and a positive, and I'm doing addition, I know that I can take 16 minus 13, and that's going to give me 3. Now I keep the sign of the number that I have the most of. So if I have more negatives, I'm going to keep the negative sign. So I'll keep that negative. We get a negative 3. Negative 3 equals t. Here I'm going to do the opposite. So the opposite of plus is minus. So minus 15.7. Minus 15.7 over here. So I have G equals, now I have two negatives and I'm subtracting. So what I can do is I can add them together. So 6 plus 7 gives me 13. With one more, 1 plus 2 gives me 3, plus 5 gives me 8. And 1 plus 1 gives me 2. Now I keep the sign because they're both the same. I get negative 28.3. Okay, let's check out our last page. We have 0 equals negative 11t. So what I have is negative 11 times t. So I can divide by 11, or negative 11. That gives me t all alone. 0 divided by negative 11, if I have a 0 on top, it is okay to do. So 0 divided by negative 11 gives us 0. It can't be negative 0 because there's no such thing. Okay, over here, we gotta draw our balance line. Now this 14 is positive, so I need to do the opposite of that. So I need to subtract 14. And subtract 14 from this side, because what we do on one side, we have to do to the other. We get k equals 20 minus 14, and that gives us 6. Here we have x divided by 1.3 equals 7.2. The opposite of division is multiplication, so I'm going to multiply by 1.3. We have x equals 7.2 times 1.3, and if I use my calculator on that, I get 9.36. Alright, last problem. Now I have something different here. First thing I see here is I have two negatives in a row, a subtraction sign and a negative. So I know if I have two negatives in a row, I can just make that a plus. So now the opposite of plus 8 is going to be minus 8. So if I subtract 8 from both sides, I get k equals 14 minus 8, which gives me 6. So k equals 6.